You have been told a story about how the world works. Democracy is the foundation, freedom is the goal, human right is the standard. Countries that hold fair elections get respect, countries that don't face the consequences. That is the story. But what if the story and the reality do not really match? What if the world doesn't really run on votes, but on value? So today we are going to be looking at the hidden logic behind international power, the pattern almost everyone sees but nobody talks about directly. This is not a conspiracy theory, this is observable behavior. Let's break it down. Hello everyone, welcome to the Dummy Effect podcast. My name is Boom Langmia. All I'm asking is hear me out, okay? Hear me out, and also like, comment, share, subscribe, and let's go. Alright, now let's look at the official version, what we are supposed to believe. Since World War II ended, Western nations have promoted a clear message. Democracy creates peace, stability, and prosperity. The logic makes sense, right? Because when people have a voice in government, they make better decisions. When leaders face elections, they stay accountable. And when courts act independently, rights get protected. This framework shapes everything. International organizations measure countries by their democratic standards. Foreign aid comes with conditions about elections and transparency. And sanctions are supposed to target authoritarian regimes. The message is consistent. Democracy is the path forward. And honestly, the truth is this: democracy does create important benefits. It protects rights in ways that authoritarian regimes or systems don't. But here is where it gets interesting. When you actually watch how countries interact, not what they say but what they do, you start seeing patterns emerge that don't match the story. Let's look at the observed reality. Let's start with China. China is a single-party state. Citizens cannot vote for their leaders. Political opposition is restricted. International organizations regularly criticize China's human rights records. But China is also the world's second-largest economy. It manufactures a huge portion of global consumer goods. Major corporations in the world depend on Chinese factories. And the Chinese market represents billions of potential customers. So how does the international community actually treat China? With complexity. I mean, it's complicated really, because yes, there's criticism, yes, there's tension, but there is also massive engagement. Trade continues in large scale. Diplomatic channels stay open, economic partnership expands. Now let's compare that to smaller nations with similar governance structure but less economic power. They face harsher sanctions, more isolation, and fewer diplomatic considerations. The difference is market value. Alright, another example, let's look at Saudi Arabia. Absolute monarchy. The royal family makes all the decisions. Political parties do not exist, and women only recently got their right to drive. Yet, Saudi Arabia is a key Western ally. Why? Because Saudi Arabia controls about 17% of the world's proven oil reserves. Therefore, it can influence global energy prices. It purchases billions in weapons and technology. This is not traditional hypocrisy. It is strategic calculation. Saudi Arabia's oil keeps economies running. Saudi Arabia's purchases create jobs. Saudi corporations support regional security objectives, and economic value creates diplomatic weight. The United Arab Emirates follow a similar pattern. The UAE operates as a federation of monarchies. Citizens don't elect their rulers, but Dubai has become a global financial hub. Emirates Airlines connects continents. The UAE invests heavily in renewable energy and technology. It hosts international business conferences, and the result? The UAE received treatment as a modern, forward-looking nation despite its governance structure. Alright, now let's look at Africa and its resource pattern. And the reason we are looking at Africa, because first of all, Africa is my continent. I love Africa. And also because looking at Africa is where the pattern becomes crystal clear. The Democratic Republic of the Congo holds more than half of the world's cobalt reserves. For those who are asking, cobalt is essential for lithium-ion batteries. Those batteries power your phone, your laptop, and increasingly your electric vehicles. And as the world transitions to renewable energy, demand for these minerals explodes. And suddenly the DRC matters. I mean, who am I kidding? The DRC has always mattered, especially when it comes to mineral resources. I don't know if you remember, the curse of the atomic bomb that the United States America used on Japan was powered by the blessings underneath the soil of the DRC. So don't get it twisted. The Democratic Republic of the Congo has always mattered, not because of the government structure, but because of what is underneath the ground, what is in the ground, minerals. But Here's the thing though, this really improves the lives of everyday ordinary Congolese citizens. Mining operations extract resources. Profits flow outwards. Infrastructure remains underdeveloped. Political instability continues. And this same pattern repeats across the continent, the African continent. Ghana produces gold, Zambia mines copper, Nigeria pumps oil. Each of these resources creates international interest, but that interest focuses on extraction and access, and not on strengthening democratic institutions or improving governance. This reveals something crucial. African nations often hold economic value, but without the corresponding political power. So they supply the materials the global economy needs, but they do not set the terms of trade. So as Africa, we participate in capitalism, but from a position of structural disadvantage. Africa is in the system, but not running it. According to the principles of democracy, Africa should also be enjoying the same prosperity as the Saudi Arabias, the Chinas, and the UAEs are enjoying. More so because we practice democracy. But for some weird reason, democracy instead makes Africa suffer. Maybe because it doesn't work the way it's supposed to. Or maybe it works perfectly. Now, let's look at sanctions and strategic choices, because the pattern becomes even clearer when we look at sanctions. Economic penalties are supposedly reserved for the worst offenders, nations that violate international norms and threaten neighbors. But look at the actual list of sanctioned countries. Some face severe restrictions for actions that other nations commit with less consequences. Iran faces comprehensive sanctions partly because of its nuclear weapons or its nuclear program, but also because its oil exports can be replaced by other suppliers. Russia faced escalating sanctions after 2022, not just for political reasons, but because Western economies believed they could absorb the economic disruption. Meanwhile, other nations with questionable human rights but deeper economic ties face different treatments. And this is not because they govern better, but because disrupting these relationships would cost more. By the way, this does not mean that sanctions are never justified. It means economic considerations shape when and how they are being applied. Now, before you think this is too simple, let's talk about why this analysis is not the whole story. Firstly, democracies really do cooperate very effectively or more effectively with each other. Democratic peace theory is not just propaganda. There is observable pattern because shared values create trust and similar legal systems reduce friction. Second, economic engagement might encourage political reforms over time. When countries integrate into global markets, citizens are exposed to new ideas, and because of that, the middle class grows. These forces can push towards greater openness. South Korea and Taiwan both democratized after a period of economic development. Third, foreign policy responds to genuine security concerns, not just economic interest. The United States maintained alliances with democracies like Japan and South Korea because of serious military considerations in East Asia. And fourth, many policymakers genuinely believe in promoting democracy. They see it both as morally right and strategically wise. These counter-arguments have real weight. The relationship between capitalism and democracy is genuinely complicated. They are not opposites and they are not the same thing either. Democracy is a political system about how power is distributed. It says people should have a voice in decisions that affect them, usually through voting and representation. Capitalism, on the other hand, is an economic system about how resources are organized. It says private ownership, market competition, and profit drive production and distribution. You can technically have one without the other. China has capitalism, private business, markets, and trade, but limited democracy. Some democracies have mixed economies with lots of government control. But why do capitalism and democracy always get tangled together? One reason is because they can support each other. Democratic rights, free speech, assembly, fair court help markets function by protecting property and contracts. Economic growth from capitalism can create middle classes who demand political rights. Both systems claim to distribute power. Democracy through votes, capitalism through consumer choice. Even though capitalism and democracy can support each other sometimes, they can also conflict with each other. Capitalism naturally creates economic inequality. Some people get much richer than others. That economic inequality can translate into political inequality. Wealthy people and corporations gain more influence in the society. Democratic voters might want regulations or wealth redistribution that limit pure market freedom. Capitalist interests might prefer stable authoritarian governments over unstable democracies. Here's what makes this whole thing genuinely messy. In theory, democracy gives everyone equal political power. One person, one vote. Capitalism gives everyone equal economic opportunity. If you work hard, you will succeed. But in practice, wealthy corporations can lobby governments, fund campaigns, and shape policy. Poor democracies might vote to limit capitalism, high taxes, and regulations. Rich democracies might use their wealth to influence other countries' politics. Some authoritarian systems deliver economic growth that democracies struggle to match. Therefore, the complication is you can't just simply say capitalism always defeats democracy or democracy always wins. These two systems coexist, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in tension, and which one dominates depends on the specific situation. So what does this mean? Democracy is real as an ideal. It influences how nations talk about their actions. It shapes diplomatic language. It motivates some policies and actors. But capitalism is real as a structure. It shapes the actual architecture of the global system. It determines which relationship gets prioritized. It influences which violations get overlooked or which get punished. This is not a conspiracy. No shadowy group coordinates this. Let's put a pin on that. I think it's simply how powerful interests operate within a system designed around market principles. Democracy provides the legitimizing narrative, and capitalism provides the functional rules. And understanding this matters because it affects how we interpret everything. When a democratic nation supports an authoritarian regime, it is often strategic economic calculations. When international institutions focus on certain violations while overlooking others, it is often reflecting underlying power structures. When African nations remain economically marginalized despite resource wealth, it is often the result of systems designed to extract value rather than distribute it. So, here is where we are. We have been told that democracy governs the global order, that legitimate power comes from the people, that fair elections determine leaders, that human rights matter more than profit. But the structure we see suggests something different. Economic value determines relationship. Market access shape behavior. Resource control creates leverage. Except for Africa. I wonder why. All these narratives coexist and all contain truth, but they do not carry equal weight when shaping outcomes. So I'm going to leave you with the uncomfortable question. Is democracy the rule that governs our world, or is it a story we tell about a system run by a different logic? The answer matters because understanding the difference between the story and the structure is the first step towards changing either one. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Zero or less consequences. But because Western nations, they could absorb the economic disruption, and the Chinese market represents countries that hold fair elections, countries that hold for Is democracy the rule? Is democracy the rule that governs our world? Because when people may have